Last time I drove to the airport, I forgot where I parked, and I was looking for my car for like 25 minutes in the snow and the ice. Not letting that happen again. Parking at one of my family members' houses. I'm Jack Tartwater. This is the first video of my monthly videos that I'm creating. For more information, the intro video is in the info box in the top right corner. Hope you enjoy. I've had to adjust to living in Kansas, and I get to share my experience from back home. One of the items of life that people from Kansas are often taken aback by is the amount of wildfires that we have in California, and the constant talk of limited water resources. People tend to exaggerate the impacts of wildfires on the residents of cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, but in the more forested areas of the Golden State, the scenes can be nothing less than apocalyptic. This can bring into question California's resource management, especially when it comes to water. Many residents chalk the drought up to nothing more than fear-mongering, although thankfully this isn't a majority of the population. Approximately 31% of Californians believe that current management is adequate or overreaching for the drought status, which is far too many. This winter break, I'm playing in the University of Kansas Marching Jayhawks performance at the Guaranteed Rate Bowl, hoping for the Jayhawks' first bowl win since the 2008-2009 season. Hopefully, as I'm editing this video, we have that bowl win under our belt, since I'll still be editing after it's over. Editing Jack here. The University of Kansas is your Guaranteed Rate Bowl champion for the 2023 season after recording over 210 total penalty yards. A win is a win. I've visited Phoenix and Las Vegas many times in the past, and the view is spectacular, if a little repetitive, and it makes you wonder what creates the draw of the desert and whether or not it's sustainable to have all these cities out here. What creates the allure of the desert? You might say that it comes with the geology, especially in the American Southwest. The place is chock full of mountains, buttes, dry washes, and canyons. You can see the layers of rock in all of these formations, and they all form an unreal pattern, especially at places like the Wave in Arizona, which I had the pleasure of visiting last summer. It makes it unforgettable. Even people like my dad will occasionally find time for a hike out here. I would argue that the real reason it seems so remarkable is because of how bone dry it is. The canyons are not occupied by massive rivers that are up to a mile wide, like they can be in the central US. There are no cloudy days to cover up the brilliant red rocks and the white sands, and the shadows cast by the towers and mesas create stunning contrasts. It can be argued that this is so prominent because the lack of rain or snow limits vegetation that obscures the sharp rock formations, and that stops those edges from being eroded away. Why is the American Southwest so dry, and how dry is it? Well, A significant portion of Southern California, Southern Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas falls under the BSK, BSH, BWK, and BWH Köppen climate classifications. All this means is that they fall into the 4 driest climates of about 23 different types. These are by far some of the driest regions in the United States and in North America. The Mojave Desert of California takes the cake as the driest desert in North America, hosting Joshua Tree National Park. If you look around the world for other deserts, you might begin to notice a pattern. Prominent deserts in the Northern Hemisphere especially tend to occur along a single band that stretches around the globe, including the American Southwest, the Sahara, the Gobi in Central Asia, and the Arabian. This occurs near the 30th parallel, and a similar pattern occurs in the Southern Hemisphere, with the Kalahari in Southern Africa, Patagonia in Argentina, and the Atacama in Chile, as well as the infamous Australian outback. There are some exceptions to this, but the rule is they appear at or near 30 degrees latitude. This all has to do with the way the Earth rotates, and how the circulation of heat progresses around the globe. To get going on this, we're going to make a few assumptions really quick. First of all, let's assume that the Earth doesn't rotate. That messes a few things up. Second of all, we're going to assume that Earth is a perfectly flat, single-colored surface that is perfectly uniform. You can call it whatever you want, it makes no difference, but I'm going to say that this is one single ocean. On our Earth, heat is spread equally around the whole equator region since our planet is spinning. But this assumption planet is not spinning, so we'll say that it's heated equally around the whole equator as if there was a giant, say, ring light around it. So our 3 assumptions are that the Earth is not rotating, it has a uniform surface, and that the whole equator region is heated equally. You'll see where I'm going with this in a minute.
What does heat do to the air? Well, it infuses it with more energy. Y'all remember those drawings in science class of little molecules bouncing around inside a circle in your textbook, and how they would be more spread apart and move faster when they have more heat? This occurs because heat is simply the measure of kinetic energy of the molecules. And so the more heat they have, the more they move and bounce off each other, which pushes them apart. You probably already know that less molecules per unit area means that it's less dense and thus lighter. But there is another process that occurs. Imagine building a wall to the very top of the atmosphere, all the way around the Earth. Heat one side up. You can see that as the air expands, some of it will flow over the top of the wall, and some of the molecules move to the other side. If you cool both sides back down to the same temperature and keep the molecules on the side to which they moved, you can see that the side that was hot now has less total air. This means that even while heated, there's less air on top of warm areas, and if we poke a hole in the bottom of the wall, the cold air is being squished harder, and so it will travel through the hole to the warm side. This is called the pressure gradient force, and it helps create circulations from warm to cold at high elevations and cold to warm at the surface. Now, let's go back to our fake Earth. Remember, it's not spinning, it's heated equally around the equator. The same effect that we just described takes place on this model of Earth. So we get uplift happening at the equator, where it's heated, and subsidence, or sinking, where it's cold. This creates a circulation around the planet. Here's the thing though, the Earth rotates, which fucks this whole thing up.
How does spinning ruin air circulation? Well, there's something fun called the Coriolis force. And if anyone's a physicist, I'm well aware the Coriolis force is only an apparent force, doesn't really exist, and so you can't really call it a force. But I'm a meteorologist, so for all intents and purposes, it's real. For me. Anyway, the Coriolis force deflects wind and water currents to the right in the northern hemisphere and to the left in the southern hemisphere. This happens because air has momentum, and if it's moving towards the poles, it goes from where Earth is rotating the fastest to the ground slowing down. And so, from an observer on the surface, the wind appears to be deflecting to the right in the northern hemisphere. If moving from the poles to the equator, the air has no momentum because the poles are moving slower than the equator. As they move southward, the Earth below them is moving faster, but from our perspective, on the surface, it looks like the wind is changing direction to the right. Ships, planes, and projectiles all have to take the Coriolis force into account as they travel long distances. Now that our planet is rotating, we can figure out how the Coriolis force affects our circulation. The winds blowing north bend to about 90 degrees to the right by the time they reach 30 degrees latitude, meaning that they are now blowing in a circle. The same happens with winds blowing south from the poles. Fun fact, this is what causes the jet streams to form around the world and the reason that they blow from west to east. The pressure gradient force isn't enough to counteract the Coriolis force at this point, and eventually the air higher up begins to sink, meaning that the circulation ends there at 30 degrees. This creates 3 cells in our atmosphere, with rising air at the equator and at 60 degrees north and south, and sinking air at 30 degrees and at the poles. You can see that these create patterns. Antarctica is often called the largest desert in the world, and it's where air is sinking. The tropics are known for rainforests and thunderstorms, and this occurs in areas where air is rising. Areas near Anchorage, Alaska, or the snowiest parts of northern Europe occur at or near 60 degrees north, which is where air is being uplifted. This all happens for a reason. Air picks up moisture from the ocean and from plants that release water vapor, which can only occur at the surface. This surface air is blown by the low-level winds to the equator or to 60 degrees, and there it ascends with the warm air. As it rises, it is squeezed like a sponge by the decreasing pressure, and so it starts to rain. The air is thus drier, and when it finishes its circulation over the deserts of the world, it's had all of its moisture stripped away from it. This lack of moisture and rain means that there are fewer plants, which creates a feedback because plants can release moisture. Less plants means less moisture, and less moisture means less plants.
That is what goes into creating a landscape as endless, expansive, and beautiful as this. More than 14.6 million people live in this fragile ecosystem, where resources can be extremely limited. The desert has had an effect on everyone who lives in it or remotely close to it. Los Angeles, despite not being in a desert, is surrounded by arid land with significant areas nearby with no rainfall. This limits groundwater and river water availability. Cities in or near the desert decimate the ecosystem, and not only in the ways you would expect. Mono Lake in East Central California used to supply up to 80% of LA's water, and it's over 250 miles away. The bird and shrimp population in the lake declined rapidly as the salinity increased by double, and the lake's water levels declined significantly. The needs of a city several hours away was decimating the ecosystem because of the arid environment the city was placed in. This goes for San Francisco too, which receives 80% of its water, or 2.6 million people's worth of water, from a national park. Hetch Hetchy is more than 140 miles away from San Francisco proper, which is the entity that funded the construction and maintenance of the reservoir, which was said to be as beautiful, if not more, than Yosemite Valley itself.
The Colorado River runs dry for the last few miles of its course, which means that the bank that so many states get water from is running empty. Mexico can no longer depend on a consistent flow of water from the river that terminates in their own coastal water. Phoenix, Arizona uses around 30% of the water that the lower division states are allotted, which is a significant impact. This means that it's vital that we share information on how we affect our environment and how we can be supportive of ecosystems while recognizing our own needs as a civilization.
Thanks for going on this adventure with me. It means the world to me. I wrote this script in about a week with a couple hours spent on it a day. And the video was all sourced by me or the providers in the description below. If you want to see the sources I used for this, those two are in the description under further reading. They're listed approximately in the order that I added them to the script, so apologies if anything seems out of order. And if you think something is wrong, I'd be happy to fact check it. Thanks to Daniel at C14 for the background music I used for this. His website is linked in the description as well. I'll see you all back in Lawrence for next month's video, and I appreciate every single one of you. Catch you later.